I'm sure all members will want to hear what the Honourable Member for Welland has to say. The Honourable Member for Welland.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my friends across the way. Their encouragement. It's always great to rise in this place at all times, Mr. Speaker. More importantly, when my colleague has introduced a motion and the parliamentary secretary from the agriculture minister and the government side is fully supportive of it, and that's a good day, Mr. Speaker. And that's an absolutely good day. I'm not sure about the chair of the agriculture committee yet because we still have yet to hear from him. But I've had a little bird whisper in my ear. Perhaps he may be saying complimentary things as well. But we wait for that, Mr. Speaker, of course, through you to my friends across the way. We await his remarks and anticipate that he also will, I think, endorse this motion because it's a good one. Clearly, the reason for it is multiple reasons for it, but some of the reasons, obviously, are to let cheese producers and dairy farmers across this country know that we understand through CETA what the impact is going to be for them. And as Mr. Wally Smith said, who is the president of the Dairy Farmers of Canada, said for the industry as a whole, for dairy farmers, it's an impact of about 2.25% of quota. Now, those of us who understand the supply system well understand what quota means. And so for folks out there who are listening to us today, Mr. Speaker, who are not dairy farmers, basically that translates to $60,000 in lost potential income for each dairy farmer across this country. That's a significant, I'll repeat that, a significant amount of money. And so that is troubling for them, and this is what this is meant to address. This motion is meant to highlight that, to try and get the government to recognize that we need a timeline that allows for the adjustment, and does a couple other things, Mr. Speaker, because what's been pointed out, and I believe my colleagues have pointed out already, and that's that issue of investment in cheese production across this country. And I can say that some of it's happened in the Niagara region. A new cheese producer opened up a number of years ago, and all of us will suggest that our cheese producers in our region are the best, and of course they are. Why else would they be? Just like if you want to find fine cheese, you should come to Niagara. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, you too can enjoy the finest wine this country has to offer. Not only that, the finest ice wine in the world, right in Niagara. And while you're there, you may be able to buy some great cheese to go with it. I would highly recommend, Mr. Speaker, that through you invite all of your colleagues that they should definitely come to Niagara, sample that cheese, and have a bottle of wine while they're at it. And if they want to come during September, they can actually be there when we have the Niagara Grape and Wine Festival, plus cheese, of course, which would actually support local dairy producers because that cheese producer is buying milk from local producers. As my friends across the way in the Agriculture Committee know, that's how the system works as well as it does. It's not just the three pillars. It is about fundamentally those producers knowing they've got a source of income and spending it within their municipalities, within their regions, buying all of those inputs that they need for their farms, whether that be insurance products, whether that be a number of different services they buy, they're buying them locally, holding that economy together. And as many of us know in the agricultural field, lenders love dairy farmers. And why is that? Because they know they have a steady stream of income. They don't worry about the fact of where's the commodity market. Is it up today for soybeans? Is it this way for canola? Is it that way for wheat? They understand in the supply managed system when it comes to dairy that dairy farmer has an income stream that's predictable. And so therefore lenders lend money to them in the sense that they know they're going to get repaid and they're not taking the same sort of risk they do in others. Now, the other farmers who are in more risky areas, perhaps there's other alternatives, but that in itself, as lenders have said to me, and I know they've said to my colleague when we've toured this country, they say, that's great for us because we've got a solid foundation in our financial institutions when we're lending those commercial loans to dairy farmers. But clearly what we're seeing here, Mr. Speaker, and what dairy farmers are talking about is this sense that there's a one-way street, perhaps. Now, I know the CETA agreement, we're waiting for details, and we've asked constantly, can the government share more than what they have to date? And And we continue to ask for that because only can you make a reasoned decision when you have the details. And as we heard today during question period, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of International Trade is saying, stay tuned. I think we've heard that a couple of times, stay tuned, but it's coming. It's coming soon. It reminds me of an old advert, but then I give away how old I am, and I maybe not want to do that about it's coming soon. But clearly, when our dairy farmers and cheese producers look at the EU market, and although we have a general understanding, the government is saying, well, you can enter into that market, and there are cheeses from Canada who are in the market now in the EU. We can't sell them for less than we sell them here in the sense of under the supply system, so that makes them at a certain price that's not necessarily competitive. But one of the biggest impediments for our cheesemakers over there, quite frankly, is GIs, or what's known as geographical indicators. So because the Europeans have this fondness, if I could use that term, Mr. Speaker, for geographical indicators, which we don't have to the same degree. We don't express ourselves when it comes to food as a geographical indicator. We may know that that's Quebec cheeses, but we don't trademark it or label it as such the way Europeans do. So things like feta can only come from feta. Therefore, if that becomes one of the geographical indicators, you can't actually make feta here. You would have to call it something else. And that's exactly what happened to champagne in Niagara. We made champagne in Niagara for decades. And by all accounts internationally did exceedingly well at it and had great product. But the geographical indicator of champagne from France won at the end of the day through a trade ruling. We no longer have champagne in Niagara that's called champagne, but we have champagne. It's now called Brut. So if you know that it's Brut, you're buying champagne from Niagara, but you have to know that. Now, I have to admit, full marks to the winemakers in Niagara for making sure that they market it in such a way that they didn't actually lose any of the domestic market. But people have to hunt to know that it's champagne, and that's the danger of geographical indicators to the cheese industry in Canada. We don't have a similar piece. So that rules us out of entering into perhaps some of those markets in the EU where there's a GI that's actually going to be an impediment to us, which is really is a trade impediment by no other means and no other name, to be perfectly honest. And so what we've seen, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to refer to my notes from Mr. Wally Smith when he was testifying in front of the Agriculture Committee a little while ago. He's saying there's been a huge investment over the last 10 years, somewhere in the tune of about $30 million from the dairy industry and the cheese producers, who have actually been expanding and building into the market as Canadians have come to know that Canadian homemade cheese is by far a great product and are looking to get hold of that product, and they have been able to expand over a period of time. So we have many artisanal cheesemakers, whether they be small. We obviously have some big ones as well, but more or less the vast majority are smaller ones. And what happens is they're taking fairly substantial risk because it's a large investment to actually start this up. How do they plan now as we go forward? So for them, the issue is how do they reinvest in what they want to do if they're not sure what the timelines are? Because if the timeline is too short, then perhaps they can't get off the ground and market their product in time to actually go forward. And that would be a real shame, Mr. Speaker, because this is an industry that reminds me of the wine industry in my home area. You know, when I was a bit younger, a few decades ago, the wine industry in Canada was seen as not really a wine industry. It was seen as, well, you make that thing you put in a bottle. And it wasn't regarded as being very good. Now it's regarded throughout the world as being on par with the best in the world and exceeding the best in the world by winning gold medals. Our cheese industry is at that point now where it's ready to make that breakthrough. I hope the government will take this motion, which they say they wish to also help, and ensure that the cheese producers that are now maturing into world-class cheese producers, that they'll actually make sure that that actually happens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.